How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing.
I'm good, fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Sure. You're welcome. So thanks for joining us. So before we talk about your latest film, can you tell us how your Fulbright program at NYU shaped your career?
Well, this goes back about 10, 12 years ago when I got my Fulbright scholarship. I got this wonderful email that I was going to New York City, a city that I always dreamt of going and studying. So I got admitted at the New York University's Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute, which is one of the best journalism schools in the United States. And I was focusing, my concentration was in the documentary program, and I got to rub shoulders with Emmy and Oscar winning faculty members. I got inspiration from people who I thought I'd never met. I was exposed to worlds that I had never seen before. I had colleagues from Egypt, from Morocco, to Africa, in places like Ghana, to people from India, the people that I would never have ever interacted with. So it was a very global experience, and it opened my brain and my mind to ideas that I was never exposed to before. And the program itself was a very hands-on experience. I actually had to make a documentary myself, and that was part of the thesis project. And that gave birth to the Pakistan 4, my first documentary film. I filmed, edited, and eventually it was broadcast at the NYU Film Festival in 2014. And in the documentary, I followed the experiences of four path-breaking Pakistani American women. And the reason why I filmed with them was because I wanted to understand why women in my country, in Pakistan, were not as empowered as women in the United States. So it was a journey of a Pakistani man trying to understand what has gone wrong and why women are not empowered. So I filmed with a saber fencer, a weightlifter, a stand-up comic, and a chef, all representing Pakistan in the United States. And they actually shaped my world after that. And I famously remember that my journalism director, once the screening was over, called me on stage and said that Shehzad came to the United States as a macho man, and he's leaving the United States as a feminist. And after that, it just changed my world. I kept on making many films on issues affecting women in South Asia, from Nepal's child brides to education in Pakistan, that won a number of awards. And because of that, I was given the United Women Singapore's Meal Ally Award in 2020. And due to this work, I was also chosen by Fulbright to represent it at the Prince of Asturias Award in 2014. And I got to meet the King of Spain and represent Fulbright. So I think Fulbright completely changed me as a person and as a filmmaker, gave me ideas and helped me with understanding filmmaking techniques that I would never have experienced without it. So I'm very, very glad that I went through this experience.
Yeah. I was going to say, it sounds like, it gave you this big global experience with meeting all of these other aspiring filmmakers, but then it also gave you a real personal experience of changing the way you thought about things. So I was wondering, I wanted to ask about one of your climate change films. Your most recent one, India's Endangered Elephants. You trekked across India and the Philippines to understand how climate change and rising temperatures are lowering the survival rates of Asiatic elephants and green sea turtles. And this was such a powerful piece that it was awarded the best documentary at the Sundarban International Film Festival. So how do you go from working on films that are focused on women and on feminism to focusing on climate change and this particular film?
Well, that's a great question, because I think in the end, climate change is also a feminist issue. I was filming in Pakistan, and the worst affected communities from climate change are communities which are not as empowered financially. And when it comes to financial empowerment, women are the most affected in countries in South Asia and the world. So it's eventually a feminist issue. But when it comes to talking about India's endangered elephants in this recent documentary film I made, the reason why we made this was that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a global body of scientists, they came up with with the report that more than 1 million animal and plant species will go extinct if we go in the current trajectory of climate change within the next decade. And in the end, if you look at the least empowered communities, we're talking about animals. We're talking about people, we're talking about species that cannot talk for themselves, cannot stand up for their rights. So that was the reason why I started making this documentary series. And we focused on two particular animal groups. One was the first part of the documentary series was in India, and more than 27,000 elephants, Asiatic elephants, call it home, but they are being impacted by the rise of coal and the coal expansion into their habitats, and it's decimating their habitats, their food, their water. And as a result, the IUCN has said that they are endangered species now. So that was where we filmed. We went to the coal fields in Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand in particular, and we filmed with environmental activists who are trying to fight back legally, socially, and creating awareness amongst people to how we need to protect these species before they go extinct and we will never be able to see them again. Similarly, we went to Palawan in the Philippines, which is a remote island, which is home to the green sea turtles, which again is now an endangered species. And due to the rise in greenhouse gas emissions, largely because of the coal use and fossil fuel use, the rise in sea temperatures is something that's not been in the focus of many media outlets. And it's the seas are warming to the extent that 7 nuclear bombs are going and exploding inside our seas every second. And that's how intense climate change is. And I'm trying to raise that awareness that not just the people on living on land, but people or species inside, deep inside the waters are getting affected. So the green sea turtles are unable to hatch their eggs because of rising sea temperatures. Their gender is getting affected. Only male turtles are being born, so their population is on the decrease. Similarly, the elephants, on the other hand, they're having metabolic disorders and they're not able to reproduce. So climate change is having a serious impact on our animal species, and that was the reason why we filmed that particular documentary series.
So Shehzad, we have a question actually from the audience from Hassan Dejana. I think he's asking, what would you recommend young individuals working on climate action do based on your experience?
Well, the first thing that we really need to do is implement changes in our own lives. I mean, we all talk about climate change. We talk about how fossil fuel companies need to change their behavior, but without making our own lives different, we won't be able to impact the world. So, for example, I have never owned a car myself because I don't believe in using cars. I use public transportation or I'll Uber. Similarly, in the last 5 years, I don't remember buying a plastic bottle because if you see my documentary Oceans of Plastic, the one I filmed in the Philippines, it's becoming, these oceans are full of plastic, and these green sea turtles eventually get stuck in these nets or these discarded plastics. So, for example, I've never used a plastic bottle in my life. So, first of all, we need to implement these changes ourselves. Secondly, I think we need to learn from our rural communities. So, with this documentary series, we filmed with communities which are far-flung. Nobody talks about them or hears about them in Chhattisgarh or in Palawan or in interior Pakistan. But what we can learn from them is that their lifestyle is increasingly very organic. They live off the earth. They don't use excessive plastics. They don't use excessive fossil fuels. But eventually, they are the ones who are getting most impacted by it. So we need to go to these communities and learn from them as much as we can. And I am going back to farming. That's something that I passionately believe in, that food security is one of the biggest challenges because of climate change. So if you want to make any difference, you need to go back to these rural communities, live with them, live like them, and that is the only way you can live a happy life. I've lived in metropolises like New York City, Singapore, Karachi, and this lifestyle is not sustainable. You really need to rethink your priorities right now, whether you want to live in these big skyscrapers or you want to go back into farmlands and live close to nature. And I think that would be my advice, is going back to nature.
I think that's good advice. But what about like jobs? Like how do people I think one of the reasons people move to big cities is probably for jobs.
True. So I personally believe that right now, if you want to make money, grow food because it's running out. And if you don't have food, it's really in low supply. You're going to make a lot of money. So, for example, I am in Bogota right now, and I am with my wife. We're going to be farming coffee. Now, if you look at the coffee production, it's going really low because of climate change. So if you can grow climate-resistant coffee, you will be making a lot of money. You can supply coffee to New York City, to people in Singapore, and they'll be willing to pay a good amount of money for that. And on the sidelines, I'm not giving up my life like of as a filmmaker. I'll be continuing doing that. But I think growing food is going to be the next big thing. I think we need to go back to that, to those jobs that we've vacated. If we look at the United States, they're having a labor crisis. Nobody wants to go back into farming, and they're going to pay you $80 an hour to go and pick strawberries. And I mean, I've lived in New York City. You cannot get $80 an hour in New York City. So if you want to make money, go back to farming.
Okay. All right. I wanted to pivot back to your filmmaking. You filmed with the 3% white militia in the U.S. as well as with the Taliban. So how do you work with people who you may not always see eye to eye with?
Yeah, I completely disagree with people who I film with. I intensely sometimes hate them. But that's the art of a filmmaker. You keep your preconceived notions and your judgments behind. And I believe that a documentary is made when the camera is off. So that is when you develop a relationship with these people. And the one key element is trust. If you're going into someone's life, you're going to film their intimate moments, you have to develop a certain level of trust with them. And you have to talk to them about what your intentions are. If you are not honest with them, you will not get the kind of access that I've been able to get with a lot of my documentaries. So with the white militia, they believe that immigration immigrants coming to the US is a bad thing. And I wanted to go and tell their story rather than to give my judgments to them. So I went in with a very open mind to understand these people. And you have to put yourself in their shoes if you want to tell their story properly. Now, if you look at, and I always do that whenever I'm making a film, is when you look at the Taliban or when you look at the 3% white militia, these people did not choose to become who they were. When you look at a 5-year-old baby, he never chooses, or if you talk to a 5-year-old baby, he will never say, oh, I want to grow up to be a Taliban, or I want to be a part of the 3% militia. It was the circumstances that these people were put in. It was the environment that shaped them. And you have to understand that before you go into their world. And keep that in mind rather than going in and judging them because your upbringing was different or your social circumstances were different. I sincerely believe that if a Taliban guy had a Fulbright scholarship, he might turn into somebody different. So it's always the social environments that these people grew up in. So, and gaining access to these people is always a challenge. And what I normally do is I get local crew. I always believe wherever I go in India, Philippines, Afghanistan, I get information and cultural knowledge of how to approach these people. So, for example, at the white militia, I was told by a local that when you go into their, so I went in to meet them for the first time in their shooting range. And they had grenades and they had bombs and they had guns. And I had never seen an environment like that in my life. And I was told that the moment you enter the field, all of them will point their guns at you and say, guns up. And this information, and this is what they do, is this is their way of allowing you into their world or saying hello. This is their style of welcoming you into their world. So if I did not have that knowledge, I would have freaked out. I might have made a move and they might have shot me or something. And I just casually raised my hands and I said, hands up. So that's how, and then they started laughing. And so they liked me from that point onwards. And similarly, the Taliban, they have a completely different worldview. And when you go in, the way you shake their hands, the way they put their hands on your chest, non-verbal communication is so important to win their trust. And the attire that you wear, for example, when I went to the white militia, I shaved off my beard. I was a brown Muslim guy who was entering their world. So I try to look and feel similar to them. Similarly with the Taliban, I grew my beard for 3 months and I had a very long beard when I went in. So you have to be very intense with these experiences. And if you have to do it properly, you have to go through these things. Unless otherwise, even a slight, movement or a word you say can, you can lose your access to these people. It's very delicate. So you are sort of performing every single minute when you are with them. So it's quite a difficult job, but it's also a fun once you are able to execute it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ask one more question and following up on that. Just
Okay. Yeah, do it. Go for it, Asha.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, so how do you get funding for, like, when you go these different places? And
I mean, there's no set rule for funding. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that filmmakers are facing today. I spent many months not being able to fund my films, but suddenly I get funding from sources that I wasn't looking forward to. So I think the one big source of funding for me are broadcasters. Now, these television broadcasters have a lot of funding from state governments. So, for example, if you look at Al Jazeera, you look at CNA Singapore or BBC, they're funded by the state, and they're always looking for stories that have access to words that they have never seen. So that's my first target. That I will always go for that. But independent funding is a little harder to get. For example, if you look at Sundance Institute or you look at other sources of funding, it's a very elaborate process, and you really have to establish yourself before anyone is going to fund you. So my advice to upcoming filmmakers would be to go to these broadcasters first, search them, spend time on LinkedIn, add as many people as you can, and that's how I just went in blindly and started adding people on LinkedIn, and eventually somebody liked my work. So, for example, the Pakistan 4 was the reason why I got my first project with the broadcaster. So it's a lot of luck. It's a lot of like poking holes in the dark, but eventually you will get there. You just don't give up. You just keep on applying and sending those emails.
Okay. And Maria, you had a question?
I was just going to follow up or summarize a bit of what you said that was really striking to me when you were talking about how you established rapport with these groups who are very unlike you, from opposite sides, have all the reasons to dislike you, never mind that you don't agree with them. It really sounds like, your tactic is going in local, knowing people locally, coming in informed, and not just going in and parachuting into the situation.
I mean, I think that the way you approach a story either makes it or breaks it. And I think that a lot of the young people, or when I was younger, I made a lot of mistakes, and I wasn't able to get the full access that you need to tell their story in the most honest way possible. So, for example, if you're only able to get one aspect of the Taliban, you're not truly doing justice to their lives. And you have a lot of moral responsibility that you're trying to tell their story. Now, if I'm trying to tell your story, I want to know you in your home. I want to know you in your professional environment. So I want to film you in many different ways and let the world experience you in different ways. So I think that's the key challenge, is to get a very holistic approach and tell their story in a holistic way. So I think that the biggest error that I think a lot of media outlets do is not represent them fully. So they will only get a certain aspect of their lives and represent it as who they are, which is not really the case. So, for example, I know Taliban members who believe in girls' education, and that would be very surprising, because what we hear from them, from the senior leadership, is that they're not going to give access to girls' schools. So you do have disagreements within these bodies. So, for example, the 3% Malaysia group, this guy loved me. He said that I love immigrants, but because of the social pressures that they are dealing with, they have to represent themselves in a certain way. So I think it also talks about the polarization that we are all facing, that we have divided ourselves so harshly and sharply that if I am a 3% militia group, I cannot disagree with my own militia, or if I'm the Taliban, I have to agree with everything that my leadership tells me, which is not really the case. And there is individualism within these extremist groups, which is fascinating for me. And I think that's what I try to talk about, and that's what makes my documents a little bit different, is that there is room for disagreement within these monolithic groups that we look at in the news media. And I think the news media also doesn't do justice to long-form journalism. I think there's a big battle going on between the two, and I think news media has very little time, and they talk in little sound bites, while as I have an hour to tell a guy's story. So I think that makes a big difference as well on how we approach subjects and how we tell stories.
Definitely. It gives more time for the nuance that you're talking about, that it's a lot harder to get in like a 3-second clip or anything on social media most of the time.
Very
Absolutely.
difficult.
True. So we have another question actually from one of our colleagues. What's been the film you've most loved working on and why?
Oh, that's a very hard question because every film I worked on has come from a place of passion. I think my first documentary film, The Pakistan 4, will always stay with me because I had no idea what I was doing. And if it wasn't for the patience of those 4 women who were very kind to me as, you know, as a young filmmaker, I made so many mistakes during the course of filming. We had fights while we were filming, and I had to take them out for pizzas, and I had to apologize to them, and I learned so much about life from those 4 women. And the fascinating part was that after 1 year of filming, I invited them over to the NYU Film Festival. All of them came, and I was so nervous because they were all sitting next to me, and I'm this filmmaker who has spent 1 year filming with their lives, and I didn't know whether they were going to like it or they're going to hate this film. And I was so nervous, I was sweating, and literally all 5 of us were just holding hands as the film was going on. And the film ended, and I got a standing ovation, and I got to go on stage, and they were also invited on stage. So I think it was such an emotional moment for me that I truly realized the potential of filmmaking and how you can change people's lives. And I'm still in touch with them. They're my best friends. We still talk to each other. Their mothers, they're all married now. They were just young people. Unfortunately, one of the characters passed away as well. So that was a very heartbreaking moment for me. But I think that film was then showed in many parts of Pakistan, and girls still come up to me and say that, you know, this film changed our lives. And the way we think about professional pursuit of excellence and stuff like that. So I think that film will always stay so close to my heart that it just still brings tears to my eyes that I was able to, you know, get this amazing opportunity to film with them. So yeah, you go on YouTube and watch the Pakistan 4. I promise you it'll change your lives. If you're a woman in particular.
Where can we watch your other films?
So most of the stuff is on YouTube. So what I've done is I've compiled a list of all these documentaries on my LinkedIn. So I mean, it's kind of self-projection, but if you want to go on my LinkedIn, you'll find all my links, including the Pakistan 4. Yeah, so these broadcasts are usually posted on YouTube, and yeah, so that's where you'll find it. And they're free of charge. You can watch it, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of the documentary filmmakers face is that a lot of their documentaries can only be viewed at festivals. But I don't really believe in that. I believe that the masses need to watch my documentaries, not the few who can buy a ticket at Sundance, and that's quite an expensive ticket. So I believe that people without any money should be able to see these films, and I'm making films for those people. I'm not making films for people with a lot of money. I'm trying to make a mass impact through my film. So YouTube is where you'll find them, or my LinkedIn channel.
Love it.
Yes. So I think we got to wrap up now. Maria, you have one more question for him?
Yes, I do have one more question to close out. So before we go, Shehzad, what is your top tip for aspiring filmmakers?
Wow, that's quite I have so many. I think patience is something that's central to documentary filmmaking, long-form journalism. Imagine spending 1 year filming with these women. I mean, the ups, the downs, the motivation runs out. So you really have to be patient. I chased one character for 6 months. I consistently requested her to be part of my documentary film, and after 6 months, she agreed to film with me. So the kind of passion you need, the kind of patience you need, is, I think, it's unheard of, and you can only get that kind of patience once you start filming documentaries after documentaries. So I think if you don't have that kind of patience, you really can't do much in long form journalism. Maybe short form news pieces would be your thing. And I think that would be my top tip. Just be patient. Just be patient and believe in the process. Because eventually, I feel that there's a thing called filmmakers luck, and you will get your subject if you chase it passionately. Don't stalk them too crazy. Be respectful when you're chasing people, but I think the filmmakers luck will eventually help you make a great film, and you really have to believe in the subject that you're talking about. So if you don't believe in climate change as I do, and if you're just doing it for other motives to become famous, I don't think you're going to go long. I don't think you're going to make it. So I think passion for that subject is really important. And I think those will be my top tips for filmmakers.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. And with that, that's a wrap. And thank you, Shehzad, for joining us today. And thank you to everyone who has also participated and asked our questions. We appreciate you.
We do. And if you're interested in learning more about Shehzad and other awesome exchange alumni, you can visit our website at alumni.state.gov and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and see you all soon for our next Mentor Talks.